In this video, we're going to walk you through all the different options that you have available for you in the PhotoVCarve toolpath. To start off with, we're going to share with you some very practical tips on how to get the best out of your V-carving toolpath when it comes to setting up and finishing your project. And then we're going to jump right into the software and show you all the different options that are included in our PhotoVCarve form. Let's first start by looking at the basic concepts and how to get the best results when creating a PhotoVCarve toolpath for your project. Let's start by looking at what PhotoVCarving is. The PhotoVCarve toolpath uses a V-bit tool to etch a picture into the surface of your material. The PhotoVCarve toolpath creates lines of grooves that vary in width and depth to represent the detail in a photograph or an image. The quality of the finished result is very dependent upon a high level of contrast between the material surface and the machine grooves, which is very important to remember when cutting designs with this toolpath strategy. The PhotoVCarve toolpath machines dark areas in a photograph with wide grooves and the lighter areas with narrower grooves. The software automatically calculates the toolpaths based on the cutter selected and the maximum depth of the groove required. A good PhotoVCarve result is quite an art form, and the ideal settings change depending on your tool bit, the wood type and color, the photo itself, and the accuracy of your CNC machine. So let's look at some tips on creating a good PhotoVCarve. The material you carve or engrave on must be flat, otherwise the grooves will not be machined at the correct depth relative to the surface. So it's a good idea to surface your wood. Since the V-grooving is so sensitive it changes in material height, it's always good to first do a thin pocket cut over the whole piece of wood to make sure it is perfectly perpendicular to your cutting bit. The tabular bed of the machine must also be flat, and we recommend that it be skimmed flat or a sacrificial board be stuck onto the table surface and then skimmed flat. Sharp bits are important, as a blunt bit will cause more wood to come out with a furry texture, and this goes pretty much for any kind of CNC carving, of course. Use a wood that does not have a strong grain. A strong grain can confuse the final result and make it hard to see the carved detail. Tighter grain provides a much better result. Preparing and finishing a PhotoVCarve machine design is critical in how the finished piece will look. As you can see from the images, a high degree of contrast between the material surface and the machine grooves is essential, otherwise the effect will not be very prominent or visible. Suggested preparations and finishing techniques may include sealing the wood post-cut using a varnish or lacquer will help ensure the paint doesn't bleed into the grain, as well as making it easy to remove the excess paint. Once your seal is dry, simply apply a dark stain or paint and wipe the excess off the surface. This will leave the dark grooves, and the contrast in the material surface will bring the design to life. Alternatively, you could carve the design detail directly into the material, paint or spray the complete job with a contrasting dark color, and then use a sanding machine to clean off the top surface, leaving the grooves dark. For more practical tips on creating good PhotoVCarved projects, take a look at the V-Carve section of the Vectric forum. So now let's take a look at how the PhotoVCarve toolpath works. Okay, to get started, let's open up a new instance of our software and create a brand new file. That's going to be a single-sided job, and we're going to make the width of this 10 inches. The height is going to be 7. The thickness will be 1. We're going to zero off our material surface. Our data will be set to the lower left-hand corner. We're going to go ahead and set our modeling resolution to very high. And our material setup, we're going to go ahead and leave it at Canadian Maple. That'll be fine. And then we can just go ahead and click OK. Now the first thing we're going to need to be able to do a PhotoVCarve toolpath is an actual photo. So let's go ahead and import that in. So we're going to go over to Import Bitmap. Navigate over to our tutorials folder and find the happy couple image. And let's open that up, and that'll be brought right into the center of our job space. Let's go ahead and select that, and holding down our Shift key, let's just size that up. So it's just about the size of our job space, maybe about visually right around there somewhere. And that looks pretty good. As you can see, this is a really nice high resolution image. It's always best to use the best image that you can get your hands on, and that will help you to achieve the best result possible with that particular image. Now that we have that all done and we have that bitmap selected, you see it's got that pink line all the way around it, we can flip over to our toolpaths tab and have a look at our material setup. So let's go ahead and select that. Our thickness of our material is going to be 1 inch. Our datum is set to the lower left hand corner. We're going to be zeroing off our material surface. And again, it's really important that our material is flat. Any kind of imperfection in the smoothness of our material may end up impacting the end result of your PhotoVCarve tooling and make it not look as nice as what it could be. So you want that to be as flat as possible. We're not going to worry about our model position in our material because there won't be any. So we're going to put that all the way to the top. And our rapid Z gaps above our material and our home and start position are set safe and appropriate for our CNC. You're going to want to adjust those for yours. And we can just click OK. As I mentioned, we have that bitmap selected. So let's jump right into our PhotoVCarve toolpath. Now we're going to work our way from the top to the bottom. We're going to touch on all the different options that are in this toolpath strategy before the end of this video. So right now our start depth is going to be at 0. So we're going to start right on the top of our material. Our maximum cutting depth, we're going to change that to be 0.05. And we're telling the software this is as deep as we want our V-Carve bit to plunge into our material. We're going to adjust our step over retract to be 0.2, not make that 0.1. And what this number here is for is as your V-Carve bit cuts along a line in your PhotoVCarve toolpath strategy, at the end of that, it needs to pick up and move over to the next line. And so when it retracts, this is the distance that you want to come out of your material. Now, it's important that you use a number that's safe and appropriate for your setup, but also keep in mind that if it's too much, it will add to the time it takes to cut your toolpath. So just keep that in mind. We're going to select our tool, and we're going to use our 60-degree 1/4 inch V bit here. So we'll just select that. In this next section, we have 3 different strategies that we can choose from to use in our toolpath. So we have raster, hatch, or selected vector. And with the raster and the hatch options, we also have some extra options here that we can use to help better define what we would like those toolpaths to do. So the first one we're going to look at is raster. And with that selected, we can take a look at our line spacing. Now we can define the actual space between the lines in our V-carving. And to do that, we can use this slider. So we can go from very dense lines all the way up to very sparse lines or anywhere in between if we'd like to. So the difference is that as we get closer to the dense end of this slider, then our lines will get closer together and give us a much better looking V-carving toolpath. Now, of course, the trade-off there is that you end up taking more time to cut your project out. And as you move farther up the slider, then of course you get more sparse lines, wider spaces between them, more flat spots on the top of your material, and you get a whole lot less detail as you go along. So for this first one, what we're going to do is we're going to put it all the way down to dense. And then we're going to take a look at our line angle. And we have the choice to tell the raster to either be at 0, which would be horizontal, or we could tell it to be at 90 degrees, which would be vertical, or we could go in the negative side as well. Or we could choose anywhere in between that if that suits our fancy. You can use the slider, obviously, or we can go ahead and type in the box what we'd like to have. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to create a raster PhotoVCarve toolpath with a very dense line spacing at an angle of 45 degrees. We're going to skip project toolpath on the 3D model because there isn't a 3D model, but if there was and we wanted to put this on a contour on top of a dome or something like that, we could do that. And for now, we're just going to leave the name as it is and we'll calculate that. Let's have a look at this toolpath a little bit closer. As we turn it up on its edge, you'll see along the bottom here is the actual step over retracts that we have here. So the tool will be pulled out of the material and I'll move on to the next line by plunging back down again. So this is 0.1 of an inch high, this step right here. And you also see there's some of those here in the middle of our job, and that's where maybe there's some white space and the tool isn't going to touch it. So it'll actually retract out, move across that and plunge back in again. You'll see that our tooling lines are actually at 45 degrees and it's all fits within inside the bounding box of that bitmap. Let's look back down on that again and let's preview our visible toolpath. That looks really nice, but it's still kind of hard to see. So if we go up here to our toolpath color, we can pretend that we've actually colored that in with black, and then we can get a better idea of what that's going to look like if we decide to stain that. And that looks really, really nice. And as you can see, where the color in the bitmap got darker, our tool plunged in deeper. And where it was lighter, or where there wasn't any color at all, maybe it was just white, then it ended up missing that area altogether or barely touched that area. But it gives us a nice looking end result here. For this size of a project, the density that we chose to have our line spacing at is probably perfect. If we ended up making any bigger, then the chances are pretty good that the image would be hard to make out. Now keep in mind that if this was a larger piece of material or a larger project, then maybe you could get away with a little bit sparser line spacing. And because you're so much farther away, it would actually all come together quite nicely. So really it comes down to what the use is, what the size of your project is in the end. But for right now, I think this looks pretty good. Now let's have a look, just for the fun of it, if we did actually make that line spacing a little more sparse. So let's go into our toolpath again, and let's go ahead and change the density of our raster to be somewhere around there. I guess would be perfect. 221, somewhere around there. That's great. And let's just go ahead and recalculate that. We're not going to change anything else. We'll reset our preview, but you'll see that the actual lines are much farther apart. So if we go ahead and look straight back down that again, because I moved it just slightly, and we'll preview that visible toolpath, you'll see what you get in the end. And those are pretty sparsely separated. You really can't see the image very well. You get a hint of it, but not really enough for a really nice end result. So anyway, it was worth a try. And the great thing about this particular toolpath is you can go in and out of the toolpath as much as you'd like and fiddle around with those settings until you get the result that you think is going to look great or the best in your material for the purpose that you're going to be using this for. And then you can go ahead and run with those settings. Okay, let's go ahead and reset our preview, and let's close this down, and let's go back into our toolpath one more time. Now let's have a look and see what happens if we adjust our maximum carving depth. So let's go ahead and go a little bit deeper with that. Let's double the depth. So let's go down to 0.1 of an inch. We're going to leave it as a raster. We're going to say use the same tool. We're going to go ahead and turn up our denseness of our line spacing, and let's recalculate that. And then we'll preview that visible toolpath. Now you're going to see right away what happens is because we're plunging deeper into our material, those lines are getting wider. And again, it's taking away some of that nice detail that we had before. So the balance that we had set up with the denseness of our line spacing, the depth of our cut, all of that worked out really well before. And it was probably, like I mentioned earlier, a really nice balance. So that's great. Let's go ahead and reset that preview. Let's close this down. Let's go back into that toolpath again, and let's have a look at the hatch option. Oh, first of all, let's set this back to 0.5 where we were a minute ago, and then we'll have a look at the hatch option. Now with the hatch option, what's going to happen is it's going to create two sets of parallel lines at 90 degrees to each other, creating a much denser image. And the upshot of that might be we get a little bit more detail in the end. On the other side of things, of course, you're cutting double the number of lines, so it's going to take double the time that it takes to do a raster one with the same settings. So let's go ahead and leave the line spacing at dense. So we're going to leave this at 45 degrees, and we're going to go ahead and recalculate that toolpath. And you'll see we get this nice hatch looking pattern here. It looks really good, looks really nice. So let's just go ahead now and preview that visible toolpath, and you'll see what we get in the end is this nice densely packed set of lines that when carved and colored in with a darker contrasting color than our wood, you're going to get a nice look in the end. And I really like that look a lot. It looks really nice. But again, like I mentioned a second ago, this is going to take double the time to cut, but the end result is really nice, so it may be worth it in the end for you. Okay, let's go ahead and reset that and close that down. And go back into our toolpath again and have a look at the selected vectors option. Let's go ahead and click our selected vector option. And right away, you'll notice that we lose the options of line spacing and line angle. That's because these are all dependent on the vectors that we're going to choose to create this toolpath with. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually create some vectors. So let's jump over to our drawing tab again. And let's have a look at our 2D view. And we're going to use our vector texture tool to create some vectors. Now, that's a really great tool for creating a series of vectors that you could use to create an interesting texture. We have a great video for this, and I will link to it below in our related videos if you want to get more in depth with this. But for right now, we're just going to choose some very basic settings here. So we have an angle of 0. Our line spacing is going to be set to 0.08. We're going to make sure we turn off our variation all the way down to nothing. Our amplitude, we're going to set to 0.25. Our wavelength, we're going to set that to 3. And we're going to make sure that we turn off our noise. We're going to place our vectors on a new layer, and we're just going to call that layer texture 2, and then we can preview that. And that's exactly what we wanted to see, so we can just go ahead and click OK. Now if I hold down my Shift key and select the vectors that we just created, I'll have both the bitmap and the vector selected, and we can jump back over to our toolpaths tab, and I can go ahead and calculate this toolpath. And we'll preview that visible toolpath and we'll see what we get. Isn't that a neat and interesting way to create the vectors to generate our toolpath so that we get a really unique looking project in the end? Now to make it even better, let's just go ahead and take it one step farther, and we're going to create a profile cut so we can cut this out of our piece of material. So let's close this down. Let's flip back over to our drawing tab. We're going to go to our 2D view, and we're going to create a rectangle, and we're simply just going to drag that in our drawing space here, or in our job space. We'll drop that there. Roughly the same size as our bitmap. We can just close that down. Let's go back to our toolpaths tab again. We'll create a profile toolpath. We're going to start at 0. We'll go down the thickness of our material, so we'll type in 0 or Z and then equals. We'll use a 1/4 inch end mill. We'll cut on the outside of that line. We're not going to use any ramp and plunge moves or tabs for this little demonstration. And we'll call this cutout. And then we can calculate that. Preview our visible toolpath. Double click on the waste material. And there we have a really interesting looking end product here. That looks really great. That'd be a lot of fun for a nice gift for an anniversary or something like that. Perfect. Let's look right back down on that again. Let's reset our preview and let's close this down. And let's look at another option for using vectors to create our toolpath with. Okay, let's go ahead and pop back over to our drawing tab. And we're going to look at our 2D view, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at our layers manager here. We're going to turn off our texture 2 layer, and we're going to make sure that we have our layer 1 here selected as our active layer. And then we're going to click outwards here. Now we need to start off with a vector. In this case, we're going to start off with a heart vector, and it's going to be right here around this area of this lady's hands. And then we're going to offset that outwards to give us an interesting pattern to run our PhotoVCarve toolpath with. So let's go to our clip art tab. Now, if you've chosen to download and install all the free clip art that comes along with your software, you would have gotten a 2D vector pack. And in the list of 2D files you have here, there's one called panel 20, which just happens to be a heart. So this is perfect. Let's double click on that, and you'll see it's appeared into our 2D view, and we can zoom out a little bit, and we can reselect that, and we can hold down our Shift key, and let's just size that down so it fits approximately around the lady's hand. We can zoom in using our scroll wheel, and we can size that up just a little bit to make sure that it's the right size around that area. It looks quite nice. Yeah, I think that's good right there. And now what we want to do is zoom all the way out of our view here. So we're going to press F on our keyboard to fit everything to our screen. Go to our drawing tab. And with that heart selected, we're going to do a series of offsets here. So let's choose the offset option. We're going to offset outwards. We're going to make the distance 0.05 of an inch. We're going to create sharp corners on our offset. And we're going to make sure that we select the new one. And if we have select new, then what we just need to do is just keep clicking the offset button. And we'll slowly get a series of hearts. And we'll just keep going until we cover up all of the bitmap. So I'm looking at the top left and right corner there to make sure we have enough hearts to cover that up. And that looks really good, so let's close that down. Now the next thing I want to do is add a nice little sentiment in here. So we're going to go to our draw text, and we're going to type in the word love. And this is a perfectly great font. It's MV Bowie, I think it's called. And that looks great, so let's close this down. Let's grab our text, and we're just going to drag it into the heart, and we'll zoom in a bit using our scroll wheel. Holding down our Shift key, we can size this down using our transform handles, and our cursor keys, we can nudge it over. If we're not happy with our kerning on our text, we can go ahead and choose to adjust that by using our edit text spacing. If I hold down my shift key, I can click between the letters, or if I don't have my shift key held down, I can click between the letters and reduce it. So holding down my shift key increases. Without my shift key, it reduces the space between the letters. That looks perfect. So let's go back to our pick tool and let's zoom back out again. Now what we can do is box select all of the vectors that we have there, and that will also include in our bitmap. Now we don't want the word love, so let's just hold down our shift key and undo that. So this is the set of vectors we're going to need for our PhotoVCarve toolpath. Let's flip back over to our toolpath tab and bring up our PhotoVCarve. Now, because I've gone ahead and pre-selected those, as soon as I do this, it's going to unselect them for us. So we're going to have to redo that all over again, just because I wasn't paying attention. Select all those, zoom in, hold down our shift key, undo that. So there we go. And now we can go ahead and recalculate that toolpath. And let's preview our visible toolpath. And we'll see what we get. That looks really great. Now let's close this down, go back to our 2D toolpath for a second, and we're going to create a V-carving toolpath using the love text. So let's choose that. We're just going to go with whatever we have here. Maybe we'll select a different V-carve. We'll use the same one that we used for our PhotoVCarve toolpath, so we don't need to swap any bits here. And that looks really great. And we're just going to go calculate. Let's preview the visible toolpath. Let's give that the right color. And there we have it. And we can rerun that cutout toolpath if we'd like to. And get rid of that waste material. And that looks really sharp too. That really makes it look really nice. Jazzes it up a lot and is really a nice, unique project that I'm sure any happy couple would love to have sitting on their mantelpiece. That looks really great. Now, up until now, we've been using the same rectangular bitmap, but what if we wanted to go ahead and using the bitmap tools in our software, edit that a little bit to give us some other unique ideas? So let's take a look at two of those. So for now, we're just going to close this down, look straight down at our job, reset our preview, and we'll close this. Let's go ahead now and jump over to our drawing tab, and let's look at our 2D view. And we are going to go into our layers manager and we're going to turn off layer 1 and we'll just select our bitmap layer for a second. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Put that in the center. Now we have a couple different options here for editing our bitmaps inside our software. We have our picture editor and we also have crop a bitmap. So first of all, with our bitmap selected, let's have a look at the picture editor. Right off the bat, we've got a few options here where we can adjust our contrast, our brightness, and our gamma. We can invert our image if we'd like to, or we can just convert it to a grayscale if we'd like to. Now, these are perfect if your image isn't quite right when you bring it in and you're not quite happy with your PhotoVCarve toolpath you're getting. You might want to mess around with your contrast and brightness and so on, and you could yield better results in the end. But for this demonstration, we want to focus down here on the add a border. So let's turn that on. And we have the option of fading our image out to white, either with a rectangular sort of profile or an oval profile. And this works really nice with this slider. So you can kind of choose how much you'd like this option applied. And I think that looks really good right there. And we can just choose to apply that. Let's close this down. And let's go back over to our toolpath tab and open up our PhotoVCarve toolpath. And instead of using our selected vector, we're going to make sure that we have raster selected. We'll leave all the other settings the same, and we can just go ahead and calculate that. Okay, and you'll see that now we've restricted that toolpath to only the photo areas of that bitmap. The white areas are being excluded from that, so we can preview that visible toolpath and we'll see what we get in the end. That's a really nice way of adjusting the look of your final piece. Now, it's important to note that if you also brought in a bitmap that had a transparent area, that would also be treated as being white and wouldn't get cut as well, or the PhotoVCarve toolpath would not be applied to those areas of your bitmap. So that looks really neat. It's a nice way to make a quick change to that image. So let's close this down. Let's go back to our 2D view for a second, and we're just going to go Control-Z on our keyboard, and we'll just go back to the original bitmap again where it started from. Let's go back over to our drawing tab again. We're going to create a brand new layer in here, and we're going to call this crop. and press enter. And with that selected, we're going to go over to our draw polyline tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line around the bit of this bitmap that we want to keep so that we can crop our PhotoVCarve toolpath to that line. And so to do that, we're going to need to actually draw an outline around this gentleman and his lovely friend here. So to make it a bit easier, because it's automatically the way the software works, when we select that bitmap and we go into a different tool, it reduces the contrast or the brightness of that bitmap. So let's close this down for a second. Let's select our bitmap. We're going to right click on that and we're going to go to our object properties and we're going to turn off our fading so that we can see it just as it is. Then we can trace around that. And we're going to use our create polyline tool. To do this, we're just going to drop a vector or drop a node down here and drop another node up here somewheres. And if we hold it down, we can go right into draw a Bezier. So we can kind of just shape this to what we want. And using our scroll wheel on our mouse and our sliders, we can kind of keep everything in focus as we move along here. I'm just going to do a really quick job. Of course, the more time you spend on this, the better you're going to be at, the better results you're going to get in the end. But we're just going to kind of drop these in here really quick. With practice, you can get really good at using this tool to kind of get the lines that you want and the shape that you want. I also have my smart snapping turned on and my snap to geometry turned on. So let's turn that off for a second. That'll make it a little bit easier to draw my lines. And I can go back in the end and I can edit these if things get a little crazy on me. Zoom out again. We'll fix that in a second. We'll come back and do that one. Same with that guy. There we go. Something like that will work. And I can just press tab on my keyboard to finish that off. Let's go into node mode by pressing, let's close this down. Then we'll go into node mode by pressing N on my keyboard. And we can just make some really quick edits to that line where things didn't quite go as I had planned. I can fix that right up. Kind of tuck everything in here nice and tight to where it needs to be, so I get as much of the bitmap in that I can. If I'd like to, I could insert a point here by hovering over that line and go with insert a midpoint. I can just drag that down to be a little bit closer. Again, I'm not looking for perfection in this tutorial. I'm just looking to give you the idea of how it all works. But I actually don't want to crop off any bits of them that I need. It certainly wouldn't be a good idea. Sometimes it's easier just to drop in some nodes really quickly and then go back and make some little tweaks to them to get them so that they're nice and tight and get all of the bits that you want. That one went really crazy. Now let's just go ahead and straighten this up down here on the bottom. And there we have it. Now what I can do is go back to my pick tool, and with that vector selected, I can hold down my shift key and I can select the bitmap, and then I can crop that bitmap. And there I have just the part of the bitmap that was inside of that vector. I can grab both of those and I can just scoot them over to the side of my job here. Looks good. Then I can go ahead and add in some text if I want to up here. Type in happy anniversary, and that's great. And we'll pull that up there like that. Make it a little bit bigger. Maybe we can even actually angle it just a little bit, size it down a bit like that. Looks really good. Perfect. Okay, let's go back to our toolpaths tab again. Let's bring up our PhotoVCarve toolpath. Let's just recalculate as it is right there. Let's reset our preview. Let's preview our visible toolpath. That looks really neat. Let's go back to our 2D view for a second. Let's bring up our V-carving and let's select this vector instead of the love vector that we had before. Let's just recalculate that. We can preview that visible toolpath. And then we can go ahead and run the cutout toolpath again. And we can preview that. And there we have another option for you to create your PhotoVCarve toolpaths with. Another great gift idea. Now, with all those different examples that we've looked at, we've seen all of the options that are available to you in the PhotoVCarve toolpath, and we've used them in several different ways. Now, I hope that this video has inspired you to take some of those family photos and create some really unique project ideas.